A prince who fills the throne with a disputed title dares not arm his subjects, the only method of securing a people fully, both against domestic oppression and foreign conquest. Notwithstanding all our riches and renown, what a critical escape did we lately make from dangers, which were owing, not so much to bad conduct and ill success in war, as to the pernicious practice of mortgaging our finances, and the still more pernicious maxim of never paying off our encumbrances. Such fatal measures could never have been embraced had it not been to secure a precarious establishment. 111. But to convince us that an hereditary title is to be embraced rather than a parliamentary one, which is not supported by any other views or motives, a man needs only transport himself back to the era of the Restoration, and suppose that he had had a seat in that parliament which recalled the royal family, and put a period to the greatest disorders that ever arose from the opposite pretensions of prince and people. What would have been thought of one that had proposed at that time to set aside Charles II, and settle the crown on the Duke of York or Gloucester, merely in order to exclude all high claims like those of their father and grandfather? Would not such a one have, p. 211, been regarded as a very extravagant projector, who loved dangerous remedies, and could tamper and play with the government and national constitution like a quack with a sickly patient? The advantages which result from a parliamentary title, preferably to an hereditary one, though they are great, are too refined ever to enter into the conception of the vulgar. The bulk of mankind would never allow them to be sufficient for committing what would be regarded as an injustice to the prince. They must be supported by some gross, popular, and familiar topics, and wise men, though convinced of their force, would reject them in compliance with the weakness and prejudices of the people. An encroaching tyrant or deluded bigot alone, by his misconduct, is able to enrage the nation and render practicable what was always perhaps desirable. In reality, the reason assigned by the nation for excluding the race of Stuart, and so many other branches of the royal family, is not on account of their hereditary title, which, however just in itself, would, to vulgar apprehensions, have appeared altogether absurd, but on account of their religion, which leads us to compare the disadvantages above mentioned of each establishment. I confess that, considering the matter in general, it were much to be wished that our prince had no foreign dominions, and could confine all his attention to the government of this island. For, not to mention some real inconveniences that may result from territories on the continent, they afford such a handle for calumny and defamation as is greedily seized by the people, who are always disposed to think ill of their superiors. It must, however, be acknowledged that Hanover is perhaps the spot of ground in Europe the least inconvenient for a king of Britain. It lies in the heart of Germany, at a distance from the great powers which are our natural rivals. It is protected by the laws of the empire as well as by the arms of its own sovereign, and it serves only to connect us more closely with the House of Austria, which is our natural ally. p. 212. In the last war it has been of service to us, by furnishing us with a considerable body of auxiliary troops, the bravest and most faithful in the world. The Elector of Hanover is the only considerable prince in the empire who has pursued no separate end, and has raised up no stale pretensions during the late commotions of Europe, but has acted all along with the dignity of a king of Britain. And ever since the accession of that family it would be difficult to show any harm we have ever received from the electoral dominions, except that short disgust in 1718, with Charles XII, who, regulating himself by maxims very different from those of other princes, made a personal quarrel of every public injury. 112. The religious persuasion of the House of Stuart is an inconvenience of a much deeper dye, and would threaten us with much more dismal consequences. The Roman Catholic religion, with its huge train of priests and friars, is vastly more expensive than ours. Even though unaccompanied with its natural attendants of inquisitors, and stakes, and gibbets, it is less tolerating, and not contented with dividing the sacerdotal from the regal office, which must be prejudicial to any state. It bestows the former on a foreigner, who has always a separate, and may often have an opposite interest to that of the public. But were this religion ever so advantageous to society, it is contrary to that which is established among us, and which is likely to keep possession for a long time of the minds of the people. And though it is much to be hoped that the progress of reason and philosophy will, by degrees, abate the virulent acrimony of opposite religions all over Europe, yet the spirit of moderation has as yet made too slow advances to be entirely trusted. The conduct of the Saxon family, where the same person can be a Catholic king and Protestant elector, is perhaps the first instance in modern times of so reasonable and prudent a behavior. And the gradual progress of the Catholic superstition does, p. 213, even there, prognosticate a speedy alteration, after which it is justly to be apprehended that the persecutions will put a speedy period to the Protestant religion in the place of its nativity. Thus, upon the whole, the advantages of the settlement in the family of Stuart, which frees us from a disputed title, seem to bear some proportion with those of the settlement in the family of Hanover, which frees us from the claims of prerogative, but at the same time its disadvantages, by placing on the throne a Roman Catholic, are much greater than those of the other establishment, in settling the crown on a foreign prince. What party an impartial patriot, in the reign of King William or Queen Anne, would have chosen amidst these opposite views may perhaps to some appear hard to determine. For my part, I esteem liberty so invaluable a blessing in society, that whatever favors its progress and security can scarce be too fondly cherished by every one who is a lover of humankind. But the settlement in the House of Hanover has actually taken place. The princes of that family, without intrigue, without cabal, without solicitation on their part, have been called to mount our throne by the united voice of the whole legislative body. They have, since their accession, displayed in all their actions the utmost mildness, equity, and regard to the laws and constitution. Our own ministers, our own parliaments, ourselves have governed us, and if aught ill has befallen us we can only blame fortune or ourselves. What a reproach must we become among nations if, disgusted with a settlement so deliberately made, and whose conditions have been so religiously observed, we should throw everything again into confusion, and by our levity and rebellious disposition prove ourselves totally unfit for any state but that of absolute slavery and subjection. The greatest inconvenience attending a disputed title is that it brings us in danger of civil wars and rebellions. What wise man, to avoid this inconvenience, would run directly upon a civil war and rebellion? Not to mention that so long possession, secured by so many laws, must p. 214, this time, in the apprehension of a great part of the nation, have begot a title in the House of Hanover independent of their present possession, so that now we should not, even by a revolution, obtain the end of avoiding a disputed title. No revolution made by national forces will ever be able, without some other great necessity, to abolish our debts and encumbrances, in which the interest of so many persons is concerned. And a revolution made by foreign forces is a conquest, a calamity with which the precarious balance of power threatens us, and which our civil dissensions are likely, above all other circumstances, to bring upon us. Notes of the Protestant Succession. 110. It appears from the speeches and proclamations and whole train of King James I's actions, as well as his sons, that they considered the English government as a simple monarchy, and never imagined that any considerable part of their subjects entertained a contrary idea. This made them discover their pretensions without preparing any force to support them, and even without reserve or disguise, which are always employed by those who enter upon any new project, or endeavor to innovate in any government. King James told his Parliament plainly, when they meddled in state affairs, "Ne suta ultra crepidam." He used also at his table, in promiscuous companies, to advance his notions in a manner still more undignified, as we may learn from a story told in the life of Mr. Waller, and which that poet used frequently to repeat. When Mr. Waller was young, he had the curiosity to go to court, and he stood in the circle and saw King James dine where, amongst other company, there sat at table 2 bishops. The king, openly and aloud, proposed this question, whether he might not take his subjects' money, when he had occasion for it, without all this formality of Parliament. The one bishop readily replied, "God forbid you should not, for you are the breath of our nostrils." The other bishop declined answering, and said he was not skilled in parliamentary cases, but upon the king's urging him, and saying he would admit of no evasion, his lordship replied very pleasantly, "Why, then, I think your majesty may lawfully take my brother's money, for he offers it." In Sir Walter Raleigh's preface to the History of the World there is this remarkable passage: "Philip II, by strong hand and main force, attempted to make himself not only an absolute monarch over the Netherlands, like unto the kings and sovereigns of England and France, but, Turk-like, to tread under his feet all their natural and fundamental laws, privileges and ancient rights." Spencer, speaking of some grants of the English kings to the Irish corporations, says, "All which, though at the time of their first grant they were tolerable, and perhaps reasonable, yet now are most unreasonable and inconvenient." but all these will easily be cut off with the superior power of Her Majesty's prerogative, against which her own grants are not to be pleaded or enforced. State of Ireland, p. 1537, edit. 1706, as these were very common, if not perhaps the universal notions of the times, the two first princes of the House of Stuart were the more excusable for their mistake. And Rapin, suitable to his usual malignity and partiality, seems to treat them with too much severity upon account of it. 111 Those who consider how universal this pernicious practice of funding has become all over Europe may perhaps dispute this last opinion, but we lay under less necessity than other states. 112 This was published in the year 1752. Idea of a perfect commonwealth. Of all mankind there are none so pernicious as political projectors, if they have power, nor so ridiculous if they want it, as, on the other hand, a wise politician is the most beneficial character in nature if accompanied with authority, and the most innocent, and not altogether useless, even if deprived of it. It is not with forms of government as with other artificial contrivances, where an old engine may be rejected, if we can discover another more accurate and commodious, or where trials may safely be made, even though the success be doubtful. An established government has an infinite advantage, by that very circumstance of its being established, the bulk of mankind being governed by authority, not reason, and never attributing authority to anything that has not the recommendation of antiquity. To tamper, therefore, in this affair, or try projects merely upon the credit of supposed argument and philosophy, can never be the part of a wise magistrate, who will bear a reverence to what carries the marks of age, and though he may attempt some improvements for the public good, yet will he adjust his innovations as much as possible, p. 215, to the ancient fabric, and preserve entire the chief pillars and supports of the Constitution. The mathematicians in Europe have been much divided concerning that figure of a ship which is the most commodious for sailing, and Huygens, who at last determined this controversy, is justly thought to have obliged the learned, as well as commercial world, though Columbus had sailed to America, and Sir Francis Drake made the tour of the world, without any such discovery. As one form of government must be allowed more perfect than another, independent of the manners and humors of particular men, why may we not inquire what is the most perfect of all, though the common botched and inaccurate governments seem to serve the purposes of society, and though it be not so easy to establish a new government as to build a vessel upon a new plan. The subject is surely the most worthy curiosity of any the wit of man can possibly devise. And who knows, if this controversy were fixed by the universal consent of the learned, but in some future age an opportunity might be afforded of reducing the theory to practice, either by a dissolution of the old governments, or the combination of men to form a new one in some distant part of the world. In all cases it must be advantageous to know what is most perfect in the kind, that we may be able to bring any real constitution or form of government as near it as possible, by such gentle alterations and innovations as may not give too great disturbance to society. All I pretend to in the present essay is to revive this subject of speculation, and therefore I shall deliver my sentiments in as few words as possible. A long dissertation on that head would not, I apprehend, be very acceptable to the public, who will be apt to regard such disquisitions both as useless and chimerical. All plans of government which suppose great reformation in the manners of mankind are plainly imaginary. Of this nature are the Republic of Plato and the Utopia of Sir Thomas More. The Oceana is the only valuable model of a commonwealth that has as yet been offered to the public. p. 216. The chief defects of the Oceana seem to be these. First, its rotation is inconvenient, by throwing men, of whatever ability, by intervals, out of public employments. Secondly, its agrarian is impracticable. Men will soon learn the art, which was practiced in ancient Rome, of concealing their possessions under other people's names, till at last the abuse will become so common, that they will throw off even the appearance of restraint. Thirdly, the Oceana provides not a sufficient security for liberty, or the redress of grievances. The Senate must propose, and the people consent, by which means the Senate have not only a negative upon the people, but, what is of infinitely greater consequence, their negative goes before the votes of the people. Were the King's negative of the same nature in the English Constitution, and could he prevent any bill from coming into Parliament, he would be an absolute monarch. As his negative follows the votes of the Houses, it is of little consequence, such a difference is there in the manner of placing the same thing. When a popular bill has been debated in the two Houses, is brought to maturity, all its conveniences and inconveniences weighed and balanced, if afterwards it be presented for the royal assent, few princes will venture to reject the unanimous desire of the people. But could the king crush a disagreeable bill in embryo, as was the case, for some time, in the Scots Parliament, by means of the Lords of the Articles, the British government would have no balance, nor would grievances ever be redressed. And it is certain that exorbitant power proceeds not, in any government, from new laws so much as from neglecting to remedy the abuses which frequently rise from the old ones. A government, says Machiavel, must often be brought back to its original principles. It appears then, that in the Oceana the whole legislature may be said to rest in the Senate, which Harrington would own to be an inconvenient form of government, especially after the agrarian is abolished. Here is a form of government to which I cannot, in theory, discover any considerable objection. p. 217, let Great Britain and Ireland, or any territory of equal extent, be divided into 100 counties, and each county into 100 parishes, making in all 10,000. If the country purposed to be erected into a commonwealth be of more narrow extent, we may diminish the number of counties, but never bring them below 30. If it be of greater extent, it were better to enlarge the parishes, or throw more parishes into a county, than increase the number of counties. Let all the freeholders of £10 a year in the country, and all the householders worth £200 in the town parishes, meet annually in the parish church, and choose, by ballot, some freeholder of the county for their member, whom we shall call the county representative. Let the 100 county representatives, 2 days after their election, meet in the county town, and choose by ballot, from their own body, 10 county magistrates and 1 senator. There are, therefore, in the whole Commonwealth, 100 senators, 1100 county magistrates, and 10,000 county representatives, for we shall bestow on all senators the authority of county magistrates, and on all county magistrates the authority of county representatives. Let the senators meet in the capital, and be endowed with the whole executive power of the Commonwealth, the power of peace and war, of giving orders to generals, admirals, and ambassadors, and, in short, all the prerogatives of a British king, except his negative. Let the county representatives meet in their particular counties, and possess the whole legislative power of the Commonwealth, the greatest number of counties deciding the question, and where these are equal, let the Senate have the casting vote. Every new law must first be debated in the Senate, and though rejected by it, if 10 senators insist and protest, it must be sent down to the counties. The Senate may join to the copy of the law their reasons for receiving or rejecting it. p. 218. Because it would be troublesome to assemble all the county representatives for every trivial law that may be requisite, the Senate have their choice of sending down the law either to the county magistrates or county representatives. The magistrates, though the law be referred to them, may, if they please, call the representatives, and submit the affair to their determination. Whether the law be referred by the Senate to the county magistrates or representatives, a copy of it, and of the Senate's reasons, must be sent to every representative 8 days before the day appointed for the assembling, in order to deliberate concerning it. And though the determination be, by the Senate, referred to the magistrates, if 5 representatives of the county order the magistrates to assemble the whole court of representatives, and submit the affair to their determination, they must obey. Either the county magistrates or representatives may give to the senator of the county the copy of a law to be proposed to the Senate, and if 5 counties concur in the same order, the law, though refused by the Senate, must come either to the county magistrates or representatives, as is contained in the order of the 5 counties. Any 20 counties, by a vote either of their magistrates or representatives, may throw any man out of all public offices for a year. 30 counties for 3 years. The Senate has a power of throwing out any member or number of members of its own body, not to be re-elected for that year. The Senate cannot throw out twice in a year the senator of the same county. The power of the old Senate continues for 3 weeks after the annual election of the county representatives. Then all the new senators are shut up in a conclave, like the cardinals, and by an intricate ballot, such as that of Venice or Malta, they choose the following magistrates: a protector, who represents the dignity of the Commonwealth and presides in the Senate, 2 secretaries of state, these 6 councils, a council of state, a council of religion, and p. 219, learning, a council of trade, a council of laws, a council of war, a council of the admiralty, each council consisting of 5 persons, together with 6 commissioners of the treasury and a first commissioner. All these must be senators. The Senate also names all the ambassadors to foreign courts, who may either be senators or not. The Senate may continue any or all of these, but must re-elect them every year. The Protector and 2 secretaries have session and suffrage in the Council of State. The business of that council is all foreign politics. The Council of State has session and suffrage in all the other councils. The Council of Religion and Learning inspects the universities and clergy. That of Trade inspects everything that may affect commerce. That of Laws inspects all the abuses of laws by the inferior magistrates, and examines what improvements may be made of the municipal law. That of War inspects the militia and its discipline, magazines, stores, etc., and when the Republic is in war, examines into the proper orders for generals. The Council of Admiralty has the same power with regard to the Navy, together with the nomination of the captains and all inferior officers. None of these councils can give orders themselves, except where they receive such powers from the Senate. In other cases, they must communicate everything to the Senate. When the Senate is under adjournment, any of the councils may assemble it before the day appointed for its meeting. Besides these councils or courts, there is another called the Court of Competitors, which is thus constituted: if any candidates for the office of senator have more votes than a third of the representatives, that candidate who has most votes next to the senator elected, becomes incapable for 1 year of all public offices, even of being a magistrate or representative, but he takes his seat in the Court of Competitors. Here then is a court which may sometimes consist of 100 members, sometimes have no members at all, and by that means be for a year abolished. p. 220. The Court of Competitors has no power in the Commonwealth. It has only the inspection of the public accounts and the accusing any man before the Senate. If the Senate acquit him, the Court of Competitors may, if they please, appeal to the people, either magistrates or representatives. Upon that appeal the magistrates or representatives meet at the day appointed by the Court of Competitors, and choose in each county 3 persons, from which number every senator is excluded. These to the number of 300 meet in the capital, and bring the person accused to a new trial. The Court of Competitors may propose any law to the Senate, and if refused, may appeal to the people, that is to the magistrates or representatives, who examine it in their counties. Every senator who is thrown out of the Senate by a vote of the court, takes his seat in the Court of Competitors. The Senate possesses all the judicative authority of the House of Lords, that is, all the appeals from the inferior courts. It likewise nominates the Lord Chancellor and all the officers of the law. Every county is a kind of republic within itself, and the representatives may make county laws, which have no authority until 3 months after they are voted. A copy of the law is sent to the Senate and to every other county. The Senate or any single county may at any time annul any law of another county. The representatives have all the authority of the British justices of peace in trials, commitments, etc. The magistrates have the nomination of all the officers of the revenue in each county. All causes with regard to the revenue are appealed ultimately to the magistrates. They pass the accounts of all the officers, but must have all their own accounts examined and passed at the end of the year by the representatives. The magistrates name rectors or ministers to all the parishes. The Presbyterian government is established, and the p. 221 highest ecclesiastical court is an assembly or synod of all the presbyters of the county. The magistrates may take any cause from this court, and determine it themselves. The magistrates may try and depose or suspend any presbyter. The militia is established in imitation of that of Switzerland, which, being well known, we shall not insist upon it. It will only be proper to make this addition, that an army of 20,000 men be annually drawn out by rotation, paid and encamped during 6 weeks in summer, that the duty of a camp may not be altogether unknown. The magistrates nominate all the colonels and downwards. The Senate all upwards. During war, the general nominates the colonel and downwards, and his commission is good for a 12-month, but after that, it must be confirmed by the magistrates of the county to which the regiment belongs. The magistrates may break any officer in the county regiment, and the Senate may do the same to any officer in the service. If the magistrates do not think proper to confirm the general's choice, they may nominate another officer in the place of him they reject. All crimes are tried within the county by the magistrates and a jury, but the Senate can stop any trial, and bring it before themselves. Any county may indict any man before the Senate for any crime. The Protector, the 2 secretaries, the Council of State, with any 5 more that the Senate appoints on extraordinary emergencies, are possessed of dictatorial power for 6 months. The Protector may pardon any person condemned by the inferior courts. In time of war, no officer of the army that is in the field can have any civil office in the Commonwealth. The capital, which we shall call London, may be allowed 4 members in the Senate. It may therefore be divided into 4 counties. The representatives of each of these choose 1 senator and 10 magistrates. There are, p. 222, therefore in the city 4 senators, 4 to 4 magistrates, and 400 representatives. The magistrates have the same authority as in the counties. The representatives also have the same authority, but they never meet in one general court. They give their votes in their particular county or division of hundreds. When they enact any city law, the greatest number of counties or divisions determines the matter, and where these are equal, the magistrates have the casting vote. The magistrates choose the mayor, sheriff, recorder, and other officers of the city. In the Commonwealth, no representative, magistrate, or senator, as such, has any salary. The Protector, secretaries, councils, and ambassadors have salaries. The first year in every century is set apart to correct all inequalities which time may have produced in the representative. This must be done by the legislature. The following political aphorisms may explain the reason of these orders. The lower sort of people and small proprietors are good enough judges of one not very distant from them in rank or habitation, and therefore, in their parochial meetings, will probably choose the best, or nearly the best representative, but they are wholly unfit for county meetings and for electing into the higher offices of the Republic. Their ignorance gives the grandees an opportunity of deceiving them. 10,000, even though they were not annually elected, are a large enough basis for any free government. It is true the nobles in Poland are more than 10,000, and yet these oppress the people, but as power continues there always in the same persons and families, this makes them, in a manner, a different nation from the people. Besides, the nobles are there united under a few heads of families. All free governments must consist of two councils, a less and a greater, or, in other words, of a senate and people. The people, as Harrington observes, would want wisdom without the senate without the people would want honesty. p. 223, a large assembly of 1,000, for instance, to represent the people, if allowed to debate, would fall into disorder. If not allowed to debate, the Senate has a negative upon them, and the worst kind of negative, that before resolution. Here therefore is an inconvenience which no government has yet fully remedied, but which is the easiest to be remedied in the world. If the people debate, all is confusion; if they do not debate, they can only resolve, and then the Senate carves for them. Divide the people into many separate bodies, and then they may debate with safety, and every inconvenience seems to be prevented. Cardinal de Retz says that all numerous assemblies, however composed, are mere mob, and swayed in their debates by the least motive. This we find confirmed by daily experience. When an absurdity strikes a member, he conveys it to his neighbor, and so on till the whole be infected. Separate this great body, and though every member be only of middling sense, it is not probable that anything but reason can prevail over the whole. Influence and example being removed, good sense will always get the better of bad among a number of people. Good sense is one thing, but follies are numberless, and every man has a different one. The only way of making a people wise is to keep them from uniting into large assemblies. There are two things to be guarded against in every senate: its combination and its division. Its combination is most dangerous, and against this inconvenience we have provided the following remedies. 1. The great dependence of the senators on the people by annual election, and that not by an undistinguishing rabble, like the English electors, but by men of fortune and education. 2. The small power they are allowed. They have few offices to dispose of. Almost all are given by the magistrates in the counties. 3. The court of competitors which, being composed of men that are their rivals next to them in interest and uneasy in their present situation, will be sure to take all advantages against them. The division of the Senate is prevented, 1. By the p224 smallness of their number. 2. As faction supposes a combination to a separate interest, it is prevented by their dependence on the people. 3. They have a power of expelling any factious member. It is true when another member of the same spirit comes from the county, they have no power of expelling him, nor is it fit they should, for that shows the humor to be in the people, and probably arises from some ill conduct in public affairs. For almost any man in a senate so regularly chosen by the people may be supposed fit for any civil office. It would be proper, therefore, for the Senate to form some general resolutions with regard to the disposing of offices among the members, which resolutions would not confine them in critical times, when extraordinary parts on the one hand, or extraordinary stupidity on the other, appears in any senator, but yet they would be sufficient to prevent intrigue and faction, by making the disposal of the offices a thing of course. For instance, let it be a resolution, that no man shall enjoy any office till he has sat 4 years in the Senate, that, except ambassadors, no man shall be in office 2 years following, that no man shall attain the higher offices but through the lower, that no man shall be protected twice, etc. The Senate of Venice governed themselves by such resolutions. In foreign politics the interest of the Senate can scarce ever be divided from that of the people, and therefore it is fit to make the Senate absolute with regard to them, otherwise there could be no secrecy nor refined policy. Besides, without money no alliance can be executed, and the Senate is still sufficiently dependent. Not to mention that the legislative power being always superior to the executive, the magistrates or representatives may interpose, whenever they think proper. The chief support of the British government is the opposition of interests, but that, though in the main serviceable, breeds endless factions. In the foregoing plan, it does all the good without any of the harm. The competitors have no power of controlling the Senate, they have only the power of accusing and appealing to the people. p225. It is necessary, likewise, to prevent both combination and division in the 1,000 magistrates. This is done sufficiently by the separation of places and interests. But lest that should not be enough, their dependence on the 10,000 for their elections serves to the same purpose. Nor is that all, for the 10,000 may resume the power whenever they please, and not only when they all please, but when any 5 of 100 please, which will happen upon the very first suspicion of a separate interest. The 10,000 are too large a body either to unite or divide, except when they meet in one place, and fall under the guidance of ambitious leaders. Not to mention their annual election by the whole body of the people that are of any consideration. A small commonwealth is the happiest government in the world within itself, because everything lies under the eye of the rulers, but it may be subdued by great force from without. This scheme seems to have all the advantages both of a great and a little commonwealth. Every county law may be annulled either by the Senate or another county, because that shows an opposition of interest, in which case no part ought to decide for itself. The matter must be referred to the whole, which will best determine what agrees with general interest. As to the clergy and militia, the reasons of these orders are obvious. Without the dependence of the clergy on the civil magistrates, and without a militia, it is folly to think any free government will ever have security or stability. In many governments the inferior magistrates have no rewards but what arise from their ambition, vanity, or public spirit. The salaries of the French judges amount not to the interest of the sums they pay for their offices. The Dutch burgomasters have little more immediate profit than the English justices of peace, or the members of the House of Commons formerly. But lest any should suspect that this would beget negligence in the administration, which is little to be feared, considering the natural ambition of mankind, p. 226, let the magistrates have competent salaries. The senators have access to so many honorable and lucrative offices that their attendance needs not be bought. There is little attendance required of the representatives. That the foregoing plan of government is practicable no one can doubt, who considers the resemblance it bears to the Commonwealth of the United Provinces, formerly one of the wisest and most renowned governments in the world. The alterations in the present scheme are all evidently to the better. 1. The representation is more equal. 2. The unlimited power of the burgomasters in the towns, which forms a perfect aristocracy in the Dutch Commonwealth, is corrected by a well-tempered democracy, in giving to the people the annual election of the county representatives. 3. The negative, which every province and town has upon the whole body of the Dutch Republic, with regard to alliances, peace and war, and the imposition of taxes, is here removed. 4. The counties, in the present plan, are not so independent of each other, nor do they form separate bodies so much as the 7 provinces, where the jealousy and envy of the smaller provinces and towns against the greater, particularly Holland and Amsterdam, have frequently disturbed the government. 5. Larger powers, though of the safest kind, are entrusted to the Senate than the States General possess, by which means the former may become more expeditious and secret in their resolutions than it is possible for the latter. The chief alterations that could be made on the British government, in order to bring it to the most perfect model of living monarchy, seem to be the following. First, the plan of the Republican Parliament ought to be restored, by making the representation equal, and by allowing none to vote in the county elections who possess not a property of £200 value. Secondly, as such a House of Commons would be too weighty for a frail House of Lords like the present, the bishops and Scots peers ought to be removed, whose behaviour, in former parliaments, destroyed entirely the authority of that House. The number of the p. 227 upper House ought to be raised to 300 or 400, their seats not hereditary, but during life. They ought to have the election of their own members, and no commoner should be allowed to refuse a seat that was offered him. By this means the House of Lords would consist entirely of the men of chief credit, ability, and interest of the nation, and every turbulent leader in the House of Commons might be taken off and connected in interest with the House of Peers. Such an aristocracy would be a splendid barrier both to the monarchy and against it. At present the balance of our government depends in some measure on the ability and behavior of the sovereign, which are variable and uncertain circumstances. I allow that this plan of limited monarchy, however corrected, is still liable to three great inconveniences. First, it removes not entirely, though it may soften, the parties of court and country. Secondly, the king's personal character must still have a great influence on the government. Thirdly, the sword is in the hands of a single person, who will always neglect to discipline the militia, in order to have a pretense for keeping up a standing army. It is evident that this is a mortal distemper in British government, of which it must at last inevitably perish. I must, however, confess that Sweden seems in some measure to have remedied this inconvenience, and to have a militia, with its limited monarchy, as well as a standing army, which is less dangerous than the British. We shall conclude this subject with observing the falsehood of the common opinion that no large state, such as France or Britain, could ever be modelled into a commonwealth, but that such a form of government can only take place in a city or small territory. The contrary seems evident. Though it is more difficult to form a republican government in an extensive country than in a city, there is more facility, when once it is formed, of preserving it steady and uniform, without tumult and faction. It is not easy for the distant parts of a large state to combine in any plan of free government, but they easily conspire in the esteem and p. 228, reverence of a single person, who, by means of this popular favor, may seize the power, and forcing the more obstinate to submit, may establish a monarchical government. On the other hand, a city readily concurs in the same notions of government. The natural equality of property favors liberty, and the nearness of habitation enables the citizens mutually to assist each other. Even under absolute princes the subordinate government of cities is commonly republican, while that of counties and provinces is monarchical. But these same circumstances, which facilitate the erection of commonwealths in cities, render their constitution more frail and uncertain. Democracies are turbulent. For however the people may be separated or divided into small parties, either in their votes or elections, their near habitation in a city will always make the force of popular tides and currents very sensible. Aristocracies are better adapted for peace and order, and accordingly were most admired by ancient writers, but they are jealous and oppressive. In a large government, which is modelled with masterly skill, there is compass and room enough to refine the democracy from the lower people, who may be admitted into the first elections or first concoction of the Commonwealth, to the higher magistrates who direct all the movements. At the same time, the parts are so distant and remote that it is very difficult, either by intrigue, prejudice, or passion, to hurry them into any measures against the public interest. It is needless to inquire whether such a government would be immortal. I allow the justness of the poet's exclamation on the endless projects of human race, man and forever. The world itself probably is not immortal. Such consuming plagues may arise as would leave even a perfect government a weak prey to its neighbors. We know not to what lengths enthusiasm or other extraordinary motions of the human mind may transport men, to the neglect of all order and public good. Where difference of interest is removed, whimsical and unaccountable factions often arise from personal favor or enmity. Perhaps rust may grow to the p229 springs of the most accurate political machine and disorder its motions. Lastly, extensive conquests, when pursued, must be the ruin of every free government, and of the more perfect governments sooner than of the imperfect, because of the very advantages which the former possess above the latter. And though such a state ought to establish a fundamental law against conquests, yet republics have ambition as well as individuals, and present interest makes men forgetful of their posterity. It is a sufficient incitement to human endeavors that such a government would flourish for many ages, without pretending to bestow on any work of man that immortality which the Almighty seems to have refused to his own productions. That politics may be reduced to a science. It is a question with many whether there be any essential difference between one form of government and another, and whether every form may not become good or bad according as it is well or ill administered. 113. Were it once admitted that all governments are alike, and that the only difference consists in the character and conduct of the governors, most political disputes would be at an end, and all zeal for one constitution above another must be esteemed mere bigotry and folly. But, though a friend to moderation, I cannot forbear condemning this sentiment, and should be sorry to think that human affairs admit of no greater stability than what they receive from the casual humors and characters of particular men. p230. It is true, those who maintain that the goodness of all government consists in the goodness of the administration, may cite many particular instances in history where the very same government in different hands has varied suddenly into the two opposite extremes of good and bad. Compare the French government under Henry III and under Henry IV. Oppression, levity, artifice on the part of the rulers, faction, sedition, treachery, rebellion, disloyalty on the part of the subjects, these compose the character of the former miserable era. But when the patriot and heroic prince who succeeded was once firmly seated on the throne, the government, the people, everything seemed to be totally changed, and all from the difference of the temper and sentiments of these two sovereigns. An equal difference of a contrary kind may be found on comparing the reigns of Elizabeth and James, at least with regard to foreign affairs, and instances of this kind may be multiplied almost without number from ancient as well as modern history. But here I would beg leave to make a distinction. All absolute governments, and such, in a great measure, was that of England till the middle of the last century, notwithstanding the numerous panegyrics on ancient English liberty, must very much depend on the administration, and this is one of the great inconveniences of that form of government. But a republican and free government would be a most obvious absurdity if the particular checks and controls provided by the Constitution had really no influence, and made it not the interest, even of bad men, to operate for the public good. Such is the intention of these forms of government, and such is their real effect where they are wisely constituted, as, on the other hand, they are the sources of all disorder and of the blackest crimes where either skill or honesty has been wanting in their original frame and institution. So great is the force of laws and of particular forms of government, and so little dependence have they on the humours and tempers of men, that consequences almost as general and certain may be deduced from them on most, p. 231, occasions as any which the mathematical sciences afford us. The Roman government gave the whole legislative power to the commons, without allowing a negative either to the nobility or consuls. This unbounded power the commons possessed in a collective, not in a representative body. The consequences were, when the people, by success and conquest, had become very numerous and had spread themselves to a great distance from the capital, the city tribes, though the most contemptible, carried almost every vote. They were, therefore, most cajoled by every one who affected popularity. They were supported in idleness by the general distribution of corn, and by particular bribes, which they received from almost every candidate. By this means they became every day more licentious, and the Campus Martius was a perpetual scene of tumult and sedition. Armed slaves were introduced among these rascally citizens, so that the whole government fell into anarchy, and the greatest happiness which the Romans could look for was the despotic power of the Caesars. Such are the effects of democracy without a representative. A nobility may possess the whole or any part of the legislative power of a state in two different ways. Either every nobleman shares the power as part of the whole body, or the whole body enjoys the power as composed of parts which have each a distinct power and authority. The Venetian aristocracy is an instance of the first kind of government, the Polish of the second. In the Venetian government the whole body of nobility possesses the whole power, and no nobleman has any authority which he receives not from the whole. In the Polish government every nobleman, by means of his fiefs, has a peculiar hereditary authority over his vassals, and the whole body has no authority but what it receives from the concurrence of its parts. The distinct operations and tendencies of these two species of government might be made most apparent even a priori. A Venetian nobility is infinitely preferable to a Polish, let the humours and education of men, p. 232, be ever so much varied. A nobility who possess their power in common will preserve peace and order both among themselves and their subjects, and no member can have authority enough to control the laws for a moment. The nobles will preserve their authority over the people, but without any grievous tyranny or any breach of private property, because such a tyrannical government promotes not the interest of the whole body, however it may that of some individuals. There will be a distinction of rank between the nobility and people, but this will be the only distinction in the state. The whole nobility will form one body, and the whole people another, without any of those private feuds and animosities which spread ruin and desolation everywhere. It is easy to see the disadvantages of a Polish nobility in every one of these particulars. It is possible so to constitute a free government as that a single person, call him Doge, Prince, or King, shall possess a very large share of power, and shall form a proper balance or counterpoise to the other parts of the legislature. This chief magistrate may be either elective or hereditary, and though the former institution may, to a superficial view, appear the most advantageous, yet a more accurate inspection will discover in it greater inconveniences than in the latter, and such as are founded on causes and principles eternal and immutable. The filling of the throne in such a government is a point of too great and too general interest not to divide the whole people into factions, from whence a civil war, the greatest of ills, may be apprehended almost with certainty upon every vacancy. The prince elected must be either a foreigner or a native. The former will be ignorant of the people whom he is to govern, suspicious of his new subjects and suspected by them, giving his confidence entirely to strangers, who will have no other care but of enriching themselves in the quickest manner, while their master's favor and authority are able to support them. A native will carry into the throne all his private animosities and friendships, and will never be regarded, in his elevation, without exciting the sentiments of envy, p. 233, in those who formerly considered him as their equal. Not to mention that a crown is too high a reward ever to be given to merit alone, and will always induce the candidates to employ force, or money, or intrigue to procure the votes of the electors, so that such an election will give no better chance for superior merit in the prince than if the state had trusted to birth alone for determining their sovereign. It may therefore be pronounced as a universal axiom in politics that a hereditary prince, a nobility without vassals, and a people voting by their representatives form the best monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. But in order to prove more fully that politics admit of general truths which are invariable by the humour or education either of subject or sovereign, it may not be amiss to observe some other principles of this science which may seem to deserve that character. It may easily be observed that though free governments have been commonly the most happy for those who partake of their freedom, yet are they the most ruinous and oppressive to their provinces, and this observation may, I believe, be fixed as a maxim of the kind we are here speaking of. When a monarch extends his dominions by conquest, he soon learns to consider his old and his new subjects as on the same footing, because, in reality, all his subjects are to him the same, except the few friends and favorites with whom he is personally acquainted. He does not, therefore, make any distinction between them in his general laws, and at the same time is no less careful to prevent all particular acts of oppression on the one as on the other. But a free state necessarily makes a great distinction, and must always do so, till men learn to love their neighbors as well as themselves. The conquerors, in such a government, are all legislators, and will be sure so to contrive matters, by restrictions of trade and by taxes, as to draw some private, as well as public advantage from their conquests. Provincial governors have also a better chance in a republic to escape with their plunder by means of bribery and interest, and their fellow citizens, who find their own state to be, p. 234, enriched by the spoils of the subject provinces, will be the more inclined to tolerate such abuses. Not to mention that it is a necessary precaution in a free state to change the governors frequently, which obliges these temporary tyrants to be more expeditious and rapacious, that they may accumulate sufficient wealth before they give place to their successors. What cruel tyrants were the Romans over the world during the time of their commonwealth! It is true they had laws to prevent oppression in their provincial magistrates, but Cicero informs us that the Romans could not better consult the interest of the provinces than by repealing these very laws. For in that case, says he, our magistrates, having entire impunity, would plunder no more than would satisfy their own rapaciousness, whereas at present they must also satisfy that of their judges, and of all the great men of Rome whose protection they stand in need of. Who can read of the cruelties and oppressions of Varus without horror and astonishment? And who is not touched with indignation to hear that after Cicero had exhausted on that abandoned criminal all the thunders of his eloquence, and had prevailed so far as to get him condemned to the utmost extent of the laws, yet that cruel tyrant lived peaceably to old age in opulence and ease, and 30 years afterwards was put into the proscription by Mark Antony on account of his exorbitant wealth, where he fell, with Cicero himself, and all the most virtuous men of Rome. After the dissolution of the Commonwealth, the Roman yoke became easier upon the provinces, as Tacitus informs us, and it may be observed that many of the worst emperors, Domitian, for instance, were very careful to prevent all oppression of the provinces. In Tiberius's time Gaul was esteemed richer than Italy itself. Nor do I find during the whole time of the Roman monarchy that the empire became less rich or populous in any of its provinces, though indeed its valor and military discipline were always upon the decline. The oppression and tyranny of the Carthaginians over their subject states in Africa went so far, as we learn from Polybius, that, not content with p. 235, exacting the half of all the produce of the ground, which of itself was a very high rent, they also loaded them with many other taxes. If we pass from ancient to modern times, we shall always find the observation to hold. The provinces of absolute monarchies are always better treated than those of free states. Compare the Pays Conquis of France with Ireland, and you will be convinced of this truth, though this latter kingdom, being in a good measure peopled from England, possesses so many rights and privileges as should naturally make it challenge better treatment than that of a conquered province. Corsica is also an obvious instance to the same purpose. There is an observation of Machiavel, with regard to the conquests of Alexander the Great, which I think may be regarded as one of those eternal political truths which no time nor accidents can vary. It may seem strange, says that politician, that such sudden conquests as those of Alexander should be settled so peaceably by his successors, and that the Persians, during all the confusions and civil wars of the Greeks, never made the smallest effort towards the recovery of their former independent government. To satisfy us concerning the cause of this remarkable event, we may consider that a monarch may govern his subjects in two different ways. He may either follow the maxims of the Eastern princes, and stretch his power so far as to leave no distinction of ranks among his subjects, but what proceeds immediately from himself, no advantages of birth, no hereditary honors and possessions, and, in a word, no credit among the people except from his commission alone. Or a monarch may exert his power after a milder manner, like our European princes, and leave other sources of honor, beside his smile and favor, birth, titles, possessions, valor, integrity, knowledge, or great and fortunate achievements. In the former species of government, after a conquest, it is impossible ever to shake off the yoke, since no one possesses among the people so much personal credit and authority as to begin such an enterprise, whereas, in the latter, the least misfortune or discord of the victors, p. 236, will encourage the vanquished to take arms, who have leaders ready to prompt and conduct them in every undertaking. 114, p. 237, such is the reasoning of Machiavel, which seems to me very solid and conclusive. Though I wish he had not mixed falsehood with truth in asserting that monarchies governed according to the Eastern policy, though more easily kept when once subdued, yet are the most difficult to subdue, since they cannot contain any powerful subject whose discontent and faction may facilitate the enterprises of an enemy. For besides that such a tyrannical government enervates the courage of men and renders them indifferent towards the fortunes of their sovereign, besides this, I say, we find by experience that even the temporary and delegated authority of the generals and magistrates being always, in such governments, as absolute within its sphere as that of the prince himself, is able, with barbarians accustomed to a blind submission, to produce the most dangerous and fatal revolutions. So that, in every respect, a gentle government is preferable, and gives the greatest security to the sovereign as well as to the subject. Legislators, therefore, ought not to trust the future government of a state entirely to chance, but ought to provide a system of laws to regulate the administration of public affairs to the latest posterity. Effects will always correspond to causes, and wise regulations in any commonwealth are the most valuable legacy which can be left to future ages. In the smallest court or office the stated forms and methods by which business must be conducted are found to be a considerable check on the natural depravity of mankind. Why should not the case be the same in public affairs? Can we ascribe the stability and wisdom of the Venetian government through so many ages to anything but the form of government? And is it not easy to point out those defects in the original constitution which produced the tumultuous governments of Athens and Rome, and ended at last in the ruin of these two famous republics? And so little dependence has this affair on the humours and education of particular men that one part of the same republic may be wisely conducted and another weakly, by the very same men, merely on account of the p. 238 difference of the forms and institutions by which these parts are regulated. Historians inform us that this was actually the case with Genoa, for while the state was always full of sedition, and tumult, and disorder, the Bank of St. George, which had become a considerable part of the people, was conducted for several ages with the utmost integrity and wisdom. The ages of greatest public spirit are not always most eminent for private virtue. Good laws may beget order and moderation in the government where the manners and customs have instilled little humanity or justice into the tempers of men. The most illustrious period of the Roman history, considered in a political view, is that between the beginning of the first and the end of the last Punic War, the due balance between the nobility and people being then fixed by the contests of the tribunes, and not being yet lost by the extent of conquests. Yet at this very time the horrid practice of poisoning was so common that, during part of the season, a praetor punished capitally for this crime above 3,000 persons in a part of Italy, and found informations of this nature still multiplying upon him. There is a similar, or rather a worse instance in the more early times of the Commonwealth, so depraved in private life were that people, whom in their histories we so much admire. I doubt not but they were really more virtuous during the time of the two triumvirates, when they were tearing their common country to pieces, and spreading slaughter and desolation over the face of the earth merely for the choice of tyrants. Here, then, is a sufficient inducement to maintain, with the utmost zeal, in every free state, those forms and institutions by which liberty is secured, the public good consulted, and the avarice or ambition of particular men restrained and punished. Nothing does more honor to human nature than to see it susceptible of so noble a passion, as nothing can be a greater indication of meanness of heart in any man than to see him devoid of it. A man who loves only himself, without regard to friendship and merit, is a detestable, p. 239, monster, and a man who is only susceptible of friendship, without public spirit or a regard to the community, is deficient in the most material part of virtue. But this is a subject which needs not be longer insisted on at present. There are enough of zealots on both sides who kindle up the passions of their partisans, and under the pretense of public good pursue the interests and ends of their particular faction. For my part I shall always be more fond of promoting moderation than zeal, though perhaps the surest way of producing moderation in every party is to increase our zeal for the public. Let us therefore try, if it be possible, from the foregoing doctrine to draw a lesson of moderation with regard to the parties into which our country is at present divided, at the same time, that we allow not this moderation to abate the industry and passion with which every individual is bound to pursue the good of his country. Those who either attack or defend a minister in such a government as ours, where the utmost liberty is allowed, always carry matters to an extreme, and exaggerate his merit or demerit with regard to the public. His enemies are sure to charge him with the greatest enormities, both in domestic and foreign management, and there is no meanness or crime of which, in their account, he is not capable. Unnecessary wars, scandalous treaties, profusion of public treasure, oppressive taxes, every kind of maladministration is ascribed to him. To aggravate the charge, his pernicious conduct, it is said, will extend its baleful influence even to posterity, by undermining the best constitution in the world, and disordering that wise system of laws, institutions, and customs by which our ancestors for so many centuries have been so happily governed. he is not only a wicked minister in himself, but has removed every security provided against wicked ministers for the future. On the other hand, the partisans of the minister make his panegyric run as high as the accusation against him, and celebrate his wise, steady, and moderate conduct in every part of his administration. The honor and interest of the p. 240 nation supported abroad, public credit maintained at home, persecution restrained, faction subdued. The merit of all these blessings is ascribed solely to the minister. At the same time he crowns all his other merits by a religious care of the best constitution in the world, which he has preserved in all its parts, and has transmitted entire to be the happiness and security of the latest posterity. When this accusation and panegyric are received by the partisans of each party, no wonder they beget a most extraordinary ferment on both sides, and fill the nation with the most violent animosities. But I would fain persuade these party zealots that there is a flat contradiction both in the accusation and panegyric, and that it were impossible for either of them to run so high were it not for this contradiction. If our constitution be really that noble fabric, the pride of Britain, the envy of our neighbors, raised by the labor of so many centuries, repaired at the expense of so many millions, and cemented by such a profusion of blood, I say, if our constitution does in any degree deserve these eulogies, it would never have suffered a wicked and weak minister to govern triumphantly for a course of 20 years, when opposed by the greatest geniuses of the nation, who exercised the utmost liberty of tongue and pen, in Parliament and in their frequent appeals to the people. But if the minister be wicked and weak to the degree so strenuously insisted on, the constitution must be faulty in its original principles, and he cannot consistently be charged with undermining the best constitution in the world. A constitution is only so far good as it provides a remedy against maladministration, and if the British Constitution, when in its greatest vigor, and repaired by two such remarkable events as the Revolution and Accession, by which our ancient royal family was sacrificed to it, if our Constitution, I say, with so great advantages does not, in fact, provide any such remedy, we are rather beholden to any minister who undermines it affords us